We're back. We are going to be continuing our conversation with Stephen Hecht about a topic that has not gotten as much attention, I think, as it deserves in its own right, let alone as a prism through which to examine, explore, and address a very, very serious problem in our country, which is that people who ostensibly work for us are doing what they want to do. The devil take the hindmost with respect to the national interests, and they are unaccountable for doing so. The microcosm we're looking at is Guatemala. Uh, about a decade ago, in the Obama years, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and our guest Stephen Hecht has been telling us a little bit about the initial phases of the drama there. But I do want to make sure we ground this a little bit better, Steve, for our audience in who was president of Guatemala as this, well, civil war, I guess one might call it, at least an insurgency mounted by Castro and his friends against the government there. How does that fit into this larger story?
Well, that insurgency failed, and in 1996, the government and the guerrilla organizations signed peace accords. So ostensibly that ended. But the reason the guerrillas signed those peace accords, they had failed to overthrow the government by force of arms. And following the Sao Paulo Forum model, they decided the best way to go was to penetrate the government and try to subvert it internally.
Mm.
And
Let
that's what
me
they
just
did.
pause there because this is such an important point. The Sao Paulo Forum, or Forum of Sao Paulo, as some call it, is a project of the guy who has just taken the presidency of Brazil.
I'm glad you didn't say got elected.
Lula, yes, I'm not saying that quite consciously, and I'm hoping that he won't stay in office very long for that matter. But just again, there's so much context here that's really important to an audience like ours that I think is generally aware of some of these issues, but needs to get grounded. So, the Forum of Sao Paulo has been a communist project fostered by Lula for, well, I guess several decades now, with help from Castro and many others now in some cases in positions of power in the region. No.
Yes, that's correct. It was Castro and Lula hosted that forum in 1990, and in Guatemala they followed its model, and so they began to
And
penetrate.
the model is one of
It's
communist takeovers
right
of countries from within,
from
from within
within.
the government specifically.
That's correct. What they do is penetrate, take over the judiciary so that they control criminal prosecution. Sound familiar? Americans should pay attention. It's happening right here, right now. And and so they started that project, and in the year 2008, they hit the lottery with the election of Barack Obama as president of the United States. Now, of course, the State Department was always partial towards the communists, but in the Cold War, they couldn't do much about it. So now that Obama was president and he had Hillary Clinton there as his Secretary of State, they took advantage of the opportunity to help take over the judiciary. That's what they did. Well, they started with criminal prosecution, so they put their attorney general in, and she persecuted political enemies, and she gave a complete pass to political allies, and they basically started taking over the country by supporting former guerrilla groups that were oppressing local indigenous people. And of course, they control the international media and the narrative. So there's a huge amount of disinformation about this.
So I think what you're bringing into focus here is that the communists who sought to take over the government of Guatemala were utilizing a, by this point, well honed technique of subversion from within in the political realm. And they were getting help from the U.S. State Department, which saw it as in its interests, at least, to bring the communists to power in a friendly democratic state like Guatemala. Have I got that right?
That that is correct.
This is unbelievable, but I guess if you know the region and you know what the State Department has been doing there, it shouldn't be surprising. So, what was Hillary Clinton's specific role? Was she just in office at the time, and the bureaucracy below her was beavering away at this? You said there was an alignment between the desires of the executive under Obama and the permanent bureaucracy, but how was that manifested in Hillary Clinton's own role in all of this?
Well, my reaction was the same as your reaction. This is unbelievable, and I didn't think that they would support this attorney general if they knew how criminal she was, which is why we went to talk to the ambassador. But then, little by little, I started to learn that it was a very conscious effort. And what got me,
Conscious at the level of the Secretary of State herself?
yes, what got me into that was a Guatemalan journalist, a friend of mine, interviewed the ambassador, and the ambassador at that time told him that he was one of the few U.S. ambassadors in the world who, every time he went to Washington, D.C., the Secretary of State received him because of her special interest in Claudia Paz y Paz. He was quoting the ambassador in saying that.
So you've made a mini documentary on this subject entitled From Hillary with Love. What's the connection here between Hillary Clinton and this attorney general who she essentially foisted on the government of Guatemala?
It's hard to say. My guess is it goes back to the Clinton administration. And there were several things that happened in the Clinton administration with the Guatemalan guerrillas. And it looked to me, I mean, if we went into it, that would take up all the time you have. Uh, but it looked to me that there were good relations between the Democrats, Clinton administration, and the Guatemalan guerrillas. And they were actually helping those guerrillas when Bill Clinton was president. I think it goes back there.
Wow. So again, this isn't entirely surprising given the hard left character of Hillary and others in the Clinton team, especially as it related to Latin America. But what we have now is an ongoing effort by the State Department long after this attorney general has moved on, obviously. And what you're saying, Steve Hecht, as I understand it, is that the permanent bureaucracy has a kind of permanent agenda with respect to this little country in Latin America. And it is continuing to engage, irrespective of who the president of the United States may be, notably during the Trump years, in ways that are, well, advantageous to the Marxists in Guatemala and detrimental to our interests in having a friendly, pro-Western, pro-U.S. democratically elected government there?
That's correct. And Paz y Paz could not get reappointed because the structure of the process was not hospitable to the left, and so they appointed the president at that time when Paz y Paz was appointed was Alvaro Colom. Alvaro Colom was honored Fidel Castro, by the way.
Wow. Steve, hold the thought. We're going to come back to this and what has been happening of late with respect to the use of corruption, a charge weaponized by the State Department and the UN and George Soros and more in Guatemala and elsewhere. Talk about that right after this.